The story of Ireland's long and arduous journey towards independence begins not with a single dramatic invasion, but with a series of incursions that slowly tightened a foreign grip on the island. In 1169, a group of Anglo-Norman lords arrived invited by an Irish king, Diarmait mac Murchada, who sought their military aid to reclaim his lost kingdom of Leinster. This initial foothold, however, soon turned into a full-scale colonization effort. King Henry II of England, fearing the creation of a rival Norman state across the Irish Sea, landed with a massive army in 1171. He asserted his authority over both the Norman barons and the Irish chieftains, establishing what would become centuries of English and later British rule over Ireland. This initial English presence was concentrated in an area around Dublin known as the Pale. Beyond its borders, Gaelic Irish culture and law continued to thrive, often in defiance of the newcomers. Over the following centuries, the English crown made repeated attempts to expand its control, leading to constant, simmering conflict. These wars were brutal and aimed not just at conquest but at the subjugation of the Irish people. The English saw the Irish as uncivilized and sought to impose their own language, laws, and customs. This clash of cultures laid the groundwork for a troubled relationship that would define the island's history for the next 800 years, creating a legacy of resistance and a deep-seated desire for self-governance. The Tudor conquest in the 16th century marked a significant escalation in this struggle. Monarchs like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I were determined to crush Irish resistance once and for all. This period saw the implementation of the plantation policy, where land was confiscated from Irish Catholic landowners and given to Protestant settlers from England and Scotland, most notably in Ulster. This was a deliberate strategy to change the demographic and religious landscape of Ireland, creating a loyal Protestant population that would secure English interests. The plantations sowed deep divisions that would have profound and lasting consequences, creating sectarian tensions that still resonate in the modern era. By the end of the 17th century, following a series of devastating wars and rebellions, English control over Ireland was all but complete. The defeat of the Catholic King James II by the Protestant William of Orange at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690 was a pivotal moment. It cemented Protestant dominance and ushered in a new era of oppressive legislation designed to suppress the Catholic majority. For the Irish people, this was not just a military defeat but a profound social and political catastrophe. It marked the beginning of a dark chapter where their rights, faith, and culture would be systematically dismantled, setting the stage for even greater struggles in the centuries to come. Following the Williamite Wars, the victorious Protestant ascendancy in Ireland enacted a series of brutal laws known as the Penal Laws. These were not merely discriminatory, they were designed to systematically disempower and impoverish the Catholic majority. Catholics were barred from holding public office, joining the army, and voting. They could not purchase land or inherit it from a Protestant, and their access to education was severely restricted. The laws aimed to break the spirit of the Irish people and eradicate their Catholic faith, forcing them into a state of permanent subjugation. This institutionalized oppression created a deep well of resentment that would fuel the fires of rebellion for generations. Despite the crushing weight of the penal laws, the spirit of resistance did not die. The late 18th century was an age of revolution, and the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity from America and France found fertile ground in Ireland. Inspired by these global movements, a group of radicals, including both Protestants and Catholics like Theobald Wolfe Tone, formed the Society of United Irishmen in 1791. Their goal was revolutionary: to break the connection with England and establish an independent Irish republic where people of all faiths would be equal citizens. They believed that only through complete separation could Ireland truly be free from centuries of oppression and division. This revolutionary fervor culminated in the Rebellion of 1798. The United Irishmen, hoping for significant military aid from France, rose up against British rule. The rebellion was widespread but poorly coordinated, and the promised French support was too little, too late. The British response was swift and merciless. An estimated 30,000 people were killed in the ensuing violence, and the rebellion was brutally crushed. The aftermath was a period of harsh reprisals, but the memory of 1798 and its ideals became a powerful symbol for future generations of nationalists, a testament to the sacrifices made in the name of liberty. In the wake of the failed rebellion, the British government sought a final solution to the Irish question. Their answer was the Act of Union of 1801, which formally abolished the Irish Parliament in Dublin and incorporated Ireland directly into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. London argued this would bring stability and prosperity, but for most Irish people, it was the ultimate act of political annihilation. It stripped Ireland of its last vestige of autonomy and ensured that all decisions about its future would be made in Westminster. This act, intended to secure British control forever, instead galvanized the movement for Irish self-determination, making the restoration of a Dublin Parliament a central goal for nationalists. The first half of the 19th century was dominated by the political campaign of Daniel O'Connell, known as the Liberator. O'Connell championed a non-violent path to reform, mobilizing the Catholic masses in a powerful grassroots movement. His greatest achievement was securing Catholic emancipation in 1829, which removed most of the restrictions imposed by the Penal Laws and allowed Catholics to sit in the British Parliament. He later campaigned for the repeal of the Act of Union, seeking to restore an Irish Parliament through peaceful means. O'Connell demonstrated the power of organized popular protest, but his constitutional approach would soon be overshadowed by a catastrophe that would change Ireland forever. That catastrophe was the Great Famine, or An Gorta Mór, which struck in 1845. The potato, the staple food for a third of the Irish population, was destroyed by a fungal blight for several consecutive years. While the blight was a natural disaster, the resulting famine was a man-made tragedy. As millions of people starved, vast quantities of other foodstuffs were being exported from Ireland to Britain, protected by armed guards. The response from the British government in London was slow, inadequate, and often constrained by a rigid belief in free market economics. This perceived indifference to Irish suffering created a chasm of bitterness and mistrust that could never be bridged. The impact of the famine was devastating and profound. In just a few years, Ireland's population of over 8 million was reduced by nearly a quarter. An estimated 1 million people died from starvation and disease, while another million were forced to emigrate in coffin ships, seeking refuge in America, Britain, and beyond. This mass exodus created a global Irish diaspora that carried with it a deep-seated anger towards British rule. The famine shattered old social structures and left indelible scars on the Irish psyche. It became the ultimate proof for many that British governance was not just unjust but existentially dangerous for the Irish people. In the desolate aftermath of the famine, Irish nationalism was reborn with a harder, more revolutionary edge. The tragedy convinced many that peaceful political negotiation with London was futile. New movements emerged, such as the Fenians, a secret revolutionary brotherhood dedicated to establishing an independent Irish republic by physical force. The famine became a powerful rallying cry, a symbol of British oppression that fueled a more radical and uncompromising demand for independence. The memory of the Great Hunger ensured that the question was no longer about reform or limited self-government, but about complete and total separation from the British Crown. As the 20th century dawned, the dominant political force in Irish nationalism was the campaign for Home Rule. Led by figures like Charles Stewart Parnell and later John Redmond, the Irish Parliamentary Party sought to achieve a limited form of self-government for Ireland within the British Empire. This would mean establishing a parliament in Dublin to manage domestic affairs, while Westminster would retain control over foreign policy and defense. After decades of political struggle, the Third Home Rule Bill was finally passed by the British Parliament in 1914. It seemed that a peaceful constitutional solution was within reach, but its implementation was immediately postponed by the outbreak of the First World War. However, for a smaller, more radical group of nationalists, Home Rule was not enough. They viewed it as a compromise that fell far short of the true independence for which past generations had fought. This group, composed of members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the Irish Volunteers, and the Irish Citizen Army, believed that, and I quote, "England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity." With Britain preoccupied with the war in Europe, they saw a chance to strike a decisive blow for a fully independent Irish republic. They began secretly planning an armed insurrection, convinced that only a blood sacrifice could reawaken the nation's revolutionary spirit and sever the ties with the British Empire once and for all. On Easter Monday, 1916, around 1,200 rebels seized key buildings in the center of Dublin, most famously the General Post Office. From its steps, their leader, Patrick Pearse, read the proclamation of the Irish Republic, declaring Ireland a sovereign, independent nation. The Easter Rising had begun. The British were caught completely by surprise, but they quickly responded with overwhelming force. For 6 days, fierce fighting raged through the streets of Dublin. Outnumbered and outgunned, the rebels were eventually forced to surrender. Initially, the rising was unpopular with the Dublin public, who saw it as a betrayal while their sons were fighting in the British Army. The British government's reaction to the rising transformed public opinion almost overnight. Instead of showing leniency, the military authorities decided to make an example of the rebel leaders. 15 of them, including Patrick Pearse and James Connolly, were executed by firing squad in the weeks following the surrender. This harsh reprisal caused a wave of revulsion across Ireland. The executed men were instantly transformed from failed rebels into national martyrs. The public, once apathetic or hostile, now swung dramatically behind the cause of the Republic for which the leaders had died. The Easter Rising, a military failure, had become a stunning political success, setting Ireland firmly on the path to revolution. The aftermath of the Easter Rising saw a seismic shift in Irish politics. The old Irish Parliamentary Party, with its focus on home rule, was swept aside. In the 1918 general election, the radical Republican Party, Sinn Féin, won a landslide victory, capturing 73 of the 105 Irish seats in the British Parliament. In a defiant act of self-determination, the elected Sinn Féin members refused to take their seats in Westminster. Instead, they established their own independent parliament in Dublin called Dáil Éireann, and once again declared Ireland a republic. This political act of separation set the stage for a direct military confrontation with the British state, which refused to recognize the Dáil's authority. What followed was the Irish War of Independence, a brutal and bitter guerrilla conflict that lasted from 1919 to 1921. The Irish Republican Army, led by Michael Collins, waged a campaign of ambushes and raids against the Royal Irish Constabulary and the British Army. The British government responded by deploying reinforcements, including the notorious Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, special police units made up of ex-soldiers. These forces became infamous for their brutal reprisals against the civilian population, including burnings and killings, which only served to increase support for the IRA. The war descended into a vicious cycle of violence and counter-violence that left communities scarred and divided. By the summer of 1921, both sides were exhausted, and a stalemate had been reached. The British government, facing international condemnation for the actions of its forces, and the IRA, running low on men and arms, agreed to a truce. A delegation of Irish leaders, led by Arthur Griffith and Michael Collins, traveled to London to negotiate a peace treaty with a British team led by Prime Minister David Lloyd George. The negotiations were fraught with tension. The British were adamant that they would not concede a full republic, while the Irish delegation was under immense pressure to deliver on the promise of complete independence. After weeks of intense debate, a compromise was reached, the Anglo-Irish Treaty of December 1921. The treaty offered Ireland a significant degree of independence. It created the Irish Free State, a self-governing dominion within the British Empire, with its own parliament, army, and police force, similar to Canada or Australia. However, it came at a high price. It required members of the new Irish Parliament to swear an oath of allegiance to the British monarch, and it partitioned the island, allowing the 6 predominantly Protestant counties of Ulster to remain part of the United Kingdom. For Michael Collins, it was the freedom to achieve freedom, but for many Republicans it was a betrayal of the Republic. The Anglo-Irish Treaty, intended to bring peace, instead plunged Ireland into a devastating civil war. The Republican movement split into 2 bitterly opposed factions. On one side were the pro-treaty forces led by Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith, who argued that the treaty was a pragmatic stepping stone towards full independence. On the other side were the anti-treaty Republicans, led by Eamon de Valera and others, who saw the oath of allegiance and partition as an unacceptable betrayal of the Republic declared in 1916. The Dáil narrowly approved the treaty, but the anti-treaty faction refused to accept the result, leading to an inevitable and tragic conflict between former comrades. The Irish Civil War, which raged from 1922 to 1923, was short but exceptionally brutal, arguably more so than the War of Independence that preceded it. the newly formed National Army of the Irish Free State, armed by the British, fought against the anti-treaty IRA. The conflict saw atrocities committed on both sides, including summary executions and bitter fighting that tore families and communities apart. One of its most prominent casualties was Michael Collins, who was ambushed and killed in his native county Cork. The pro-treaty forces ultimately prevailed, but the war left a legacy of deep and lasting bitterness that would poison Irish politics for decades. In the aftermath of the Civil War, the pro-treaty party, Cumann na Ingadhíl, led by W.T. Cosgrave, set about the difficult task of building the new Irish Free State. They established the institutions of a stable parliamentary democracy, created a police force and restored law and order. However, in 1932, their great rival, Eamon de Valera, who had led the anti-treaty side, came to power peacefully. Once in government, de Valera began a systematic process of dismantling the treaty. He abolished the Oath of Allegiance, removed the British monarch's representative, and in 1937 introduced a new constitution, Bunreacht na Herian, which effectively made Ireland a republic in all but name. The final step in this long journey came after the Second World War, a conflict in which Ireland demonstrated its sovereignty by remaining neutral. In 1948, the government led by John A. Costello passed the Republic of Ireland Act. This act formally severed the last remaining political ties to the British monarchy, declaring Ireland a full and independent republic. The act came into force on Easter Monday 1949, 33 years to the day after the 1916 Rising. While the issue of partition and the status of Northern Ireland remained a source of profound conflict, the 26 counties of the South had finally achieved the sovereign independence that generations had fought and died for.